Good. So hello and welcome everybody. Welcome to the International Procurement Forum. This forum is happening as part of a wider festival called Business Insights Festival, which takes place today and tomorrow. And there are a number of events that are taking place covering a variety of different subjects. The focus of the festival is very much on the international aspects of business and innovation. So this forum, which is all about procurement, is no different. We're going to look at an international sort of perspective and talk about what's happening with procurement practices and developments in various geographies around the world, and talk about what businesses can do to overcome challenges that those practices might introduce, or if they are being relaxed in any way, take advantage of those relaxations, of those opportunities. So I'm going to now introduce the panel. Well, sorry, I'll say that again. I will ask the panel to introduce themselves. And I will start from my top of my screen and just go around. So the first person I see is Sean.
Hello everybody, I'm Sean Gibbs. I'm a Managing Director of Hanscom Intercontinental. We provide expert advisory and expert witness services to the construction, engineering and shipbuilding industries. I've worked across all of the continents of the world, and the company has offices with a head office in London, New York, Johannesburg and Hong Kong.
Okay, thank you. Ian?
Thanks, Steve. Hi, I'm Ian McQuone from Go Climate Positive. I help businesses to improve their sustainability, especially to understand their carbon footprint and reduce it. And I'm also a member of the Cheltenham Economic Recovery Task Force.
Okay, thank you. Good to see Nicole. Nicole, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi everybody, I'm Nicole O'Connor. I'm the Commercial Director for Western Aviation. We have 5 fixed-based operations in the UK and Ireland and deal with private aircraft handling. And I head up the private charter team and help businesses to move their passengers across the world, whether it's leisure or business, and move cargo internationally as well. We also provide fuel in 55 locations now, which is another service that we provide.
Thank you. Nancy? You're on mute.
Sorry, wasn't mute quick enough. 1 second. Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Nancy Myers. I run a company called IMEX China Trade Limited. We're essentially a international trader as well as an import and export consultancy service provider, specializing in trade between the UK and China, where I grew up, but obviously not limited to these markets. Over 25 years, although this is not the age of the company, we help business both in the UK and the Great China region to achieve a profitable trading relationships through our expertise in strategic sourcing, market insight, negotiation, supply chain management, global shipping logistics, custom regulations, and all other aspects required to facilitate the successful trade. The industrial sectors we've been engaged in are food and food services, horticultural, hospitality, outdoor leisure, pest control, sports and fitness.
Good, thank you.
Thank you.
Justin?
Hello everybody, my name is Justin. I'm the owner of Revealed Business. We're based in Northern Ireland here, and we support clients in both Northern Ireland the Republic of Ireland and also mainland UK. My background is predominantly in procurement and operations, approaching 20 years in procurement essentially with Coca-Cola and with Kingspan Environmental before setting up Reveal Business 5 years ago. We have two key elements, I suppose, but there's more. But we work essentially, the first one will be we work with small to medium businesses across their entire business to make them better, provide direction, and most importantly, increase their profits. We also work with medium to larger companies across all sectors, mainly within the procurement and supply chain functions, to find them significant cost savings, efficiencies, and deliver specific projects. And that's Reveal.
Thank you. Victor?
Hello everyone, my name is Victor Rak. I'm director at Profitia Management Consulting, which is a leading procurement consultancy in Central and Eastern Europe. I've been working on procurement projects for over 10 years now. I've been working for clients in sectors oil and gas, energy, foodstuff production, and also construction. And I specialize predominantly in procurement process formulation, category management, meaning defining category strategies and their implementation, as well as development of procurement teams.
Thank you. Thank you. And Luke?
Hi everybody, I'm Luke Townsend. I'm a co-founder of a company called tendopro.com, and basically our main focus is to bring digital transformation to under-resourced areas. That is something that we work on a lot, and we'll end up working in a couple of different countries where we have some experience of doing procurement in a few African countries, as well as now recently in the UK. Our offices are based here, well, our new office is based here in Cheltenham as of 2 months ago. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And I think that's everyone except me from the panel. So I'm Steve Bates. I spent 35 years doing procurement, either on one side of the table buying stuff from suppliers, or on the other side of the table trying to sell stuff to customers, procurement teams. I decided that I would stop working in the corporate sector and begin life as a business owner. And I took that plunge in September of 2019. It's been an interesting journey so far. I am offering procurement, supply chain and cost management services to clients in a number of sectors. So that's me. And I don't think we've got Eleanor on yet. And someone who might be joining us around about 1:30 is going to be Sandra Bear, who's based in the States. And I know she's got strong views on procurement, so it would be good to get her views when she joins. Anyway, I'd also like to welcome the panel. The guests who I can see are, we've got about 8 guests on, some of them from Victor's company, I see. And welcome you all. And if you have any questions as the discussion develops, then I invite you to make your points either through the chat, or you can actually come off mute and say a few words. Right, so we've got some questions that I want to raise with the panel to sort of start the discussion off. And the first question is going to relate to doing business with the public sector, which I know from my own experience when I was doing selling into clients. I dealt a lot with the public sector in the UK, quite a tough market, very much process oriented. And I'd be interested to find out whether others on the panel have got experience in other territories in dealing with public sector. So the question I have for you is, what are the challenges that SMEs face when trying to enter international public sector markets, and how best to mitigate those challenges? So who shall we start with? How about you, Victor?
Of course, yeah. So when we think about CMEs entering the new market and trying to get some public tenders, you may think about, generally speaking, two kinds of challenges they may come across. The first ones I would call the technical ones, because it's a new market. And the second group of challenges, which might be even more important, are, so to speak, the mental ones. Let me start first with these technical challenges. So first of all, it's the source of information. So entering new market, you need to figure out how you can get information about new tenders, and also how as you, Steve, mentioned, how is it organized in terms of process and requirements. So it may require some know-how and some time to figure that out. But when we think about Central and Eastern Europe and the European markets, then it's a little bit standardized. Besides, you may also think that it's challenging to have some specific requirements and specific attitude towards tenders. So, for example, there is a strong tendency that price is the only award criterion. So when you, at the peak of this trend, over 90% of tenders in Poland were awarded according to the lowest price criterion, effectively regardless of the quality you can offer. So it seems to be a challenge for companies that focus on quality or more advanced solutions. Also, like the final remark on that is the fact that in terms of mental challenges, the most important one is a kind of mistrust between the public bodies and the newbies on the market, newcomers. So it's definitely worth investing in some PR and marketing and a kind of explanation what's our offer and how we can add value to the public sector, to the public body that it's about to buy our services, goods. So this mistrust, it's I would say the most significant challenge, and it takes time to overcome it. So I would like to emphasize 3 recommendations for SMEs in terms of entering the new market. Firstly, it's worth finding a niche. So when you can offer something unique and something what is needed by the public body, but no one else is offering, then they will find the ways to help you out. And it should be one of the most efficient ways to get a foothold on the new market. Secondly, it's worth pondering on having a local agent. I don't mean only local lawyers, which might be also useful, but I mean the local company which have some know-how, some network, and it might be very helpful. We as Profitia, we are working in this way, for example, for CIPS or some other consultancies. And it works very well because you fuse top-notch know-how, the global top-notch know-how with the local know-how, and it's really beneficial for both parties. Thirdly, if I were a SME company entering the new market, I would definitely look into the level of digitalization of public procurement. A nice proxy of it is the general level of digitalization in the country. So according to some surveys in Europe, Denmark, Finland, the Netherlands, and Sweden are the top ones. So you can also assume that they are very good at digitalization, and it means, as a consequence, that you will have an easy access to the great deal of information. So it would save up a lot of your transaction costs. Thank you.
Thank you. Nicole, have you got experience of doing business with the public sector?
Not in such, well, during the pandemic especially, yeah. Public sector, I think the biggest problem that we've had is actually not enough links to get to those, lists of supply chain where we can register, where we can be part of that buyer supplier community, really. So we found it quite hard to gain access to those trading sites. ploughing away.
Yeah, it is quite difficult because I know from my own experience of UK, you can get onto public sector frameworks, right? And you rub your hands that you're on a public sector contract, but if you do nothing, no business will come your way. Because
No, some business has come our way internationally,
Yeah.
and actually, thankfully, I think it's in one of the questions, but we've done a lot of work with ship crew changes and, with the roll-on, roll-off container shipments, etc. worldwide. But it has been quite, challenged to get into the markets. And I was quite pleased just now when Victor just mentioned, Denmark, Finland, because those are markets that are little nuggets of opportunity that we found, and actually that has been much easier to register with and to be kind of part of it.
Okay, good. Luke, what's happening in South Africa when it comes to public sector procurement?
a lot. I think, what Victor was talking about really resonated with me, makes a lot of sense. And I think in wanting to do business in South Africa, and probably a lot of the African territories are similar, is that kind of in-country partnership is very important. You've got these cultural issues that are always going to be at the back of your relationship, and I'm not sure. I'm interested that Victor's talking about those to be, also in his markets and things like that. And I would really stress that it's important to find sort of in-partner relationships, because it does give a new entry into the market that credential that they might need. The one thing that I'd probably just say to be wary of is to make sure that connection isn't of a political nature, because you can find that there's a lot of upheaval. I mean, people talk about the fact that it might be one party that has been there for a significant amount of time, and that would maybe show that there's some sort of consistency, but that's not the case, because even within a party itself, there might be a lot of people that are coming to power and losing power and having say and sway, which can change on a regular basis. And again, it's only those types of things that local knowledge will be able to, to assist you with. And we are sort of in South Africa, probably one of the few companies that does work with both public sector and private sector. We have found over the last few years, a lot of local-based South African companies, what kind of started the process with the end of apartheid, which was obviously an excellent and momentous day in all South Africans' lives. But what happened with the change was that you would have some companies that would have a public sector area of work and in a commercial sector area of work, and that was fairly conventional. I imagine that is quite conventional in a lot of other markets as well. But what we found in South Africa was that you started getting a bigger spin of those companies that's becoming their own entities. So you built a company to work with public sector. And the reason why you did that was so that you could understand culture, that you could create the right kind of, and it was really a very positive thing, because it created a huge amount of opportunity for a lot of people to participate in the marketplace, which was so necessary, as I'm sure you're all aware. But the point is, you did end up getting these different types of companies, some that were dealing in the public sector and some that were dealing in the private sector. And it can be quite a tricky thing to navigate if you don't have that sort of in-country partnership that, that Victor was referring to.
Good. Okay, thank you. Sean?
I'd just like to come in there about South Africa. I did a lot of work in South Africa with the parastate company, Eskom, and understanding the culture, not only the organisation, but also the particular region you're working in is important, not just on a country level. Various issues working with parastatals in Africa and other countries, the way that they operate, understanding how they do things and how different managers and departments or business areas do things. So I was involved in some of the coal-fired power station build programs that have been a series of massive cost overruns and corruption, and there's been a lot of prosecutions following on from that. And if you were going in there as an SME and you don't understand what are the issues that they faced in the past, you're not really going to have a full picture of how you're going to be able to operate, how you're going to connect with people, the appropriate way to connect with people. So, for example, obviously people have a chat with someone in a hotel bar and can strike up a relationship. If you're entering a market, you know, for the first time, that's probably not an ideal way to do that. What you could do, for example, if you're going out from the UK, is make contact with chambers of commerce, or, for example, tie up with a British Embassy commercial staff, ask them to make proper formal introductions, ask them to give you briefings on appropriate cultural behaviour, tell you about local legislation, and also if there's any conflict between your home country, i.e. UK, and the local country, and advising you on issues and challenges. We're just putting together a bid for a consultancy project in Afghanistan at the moment. And the first thing I had to do was arrange security quotes, but also touch base with the embassy to find out what's going on and what are the main issues. They'll be able to warn you about certain ministries and certain ministers and those in those things that might not operate ethically, and advise you how to get around that problem. So it's really getting good advice and striking up the right relationships, I think, if you're going out as an SME. You know, if you're like Del Boy from Trotter Trading and you don't care, that's fine. Get on a plane, do what you want. You know, people have made a fortune in Dubai over the years when Dubai opened up. Some have done very well. But if you're looking at having a good reputation and operating along ethical lines, you know, you need to understand that there are processes and procedures and good ways to develop your business and make the connections.
Okay.
It must have been a fascinating time working with Eskom with those challenges and things. So all my mates have been phoning me all morning, say we've had load shedding in South Africa for the whole week. So we've been load shedding, for those of you that don't know, is when the power gets turned off between 4 to 6 hours on a daily basis to try and conserve output of energy. So it's a massive debilitator for business and all the rest of it. But yeah, it must have been a fascinating time, Sean.
Yeah, it was. We're still doing stuff in other parts of Africa. And what people sometimes do is think that they can use South Africa as an entry point for sub-Saharan Africa. And to a certain extent you can, but each country is so different. You need to do a lot more legwork than you realise. You know, you're not just, it's massive areas and there's so many different people and personalities involved in each country. So it's really, if you are going to think of South Africa as your entry point, you know, it's good. In terms of language barriers and stuff, you haven't really got language barriers, but it isn't necessarily going to help you access those other African markets unless you're doing the same sort of exercise again and putting in a lot of effort.
100%. And unfortunately, you know, to go back to what Victor was talking about earlier also, is that you do create those in-country partnerships or agencies and things like that. And unfortunately, it does have the effect of driving up the cost of those particular units, because obviously you're adding someone else into the food chain that needs to also take their bit. And you do land up with a lot of these countries that are spending maybe a little bit more money than they should be on certain products and services, because you need to account for that extra markup that might take place. But unfortunately, for a lot of us that want to deal in those marketplace in country, or, you know, getting that cultural thing right does make a huge amount of sense, because you can have you know, your speed to market is improved if you've got that credibility of having a local partner.
I found this in operating in the Gulf region. So that's Dubai, Abu Dhabi, Oman, Qatar, Kuwait, that you really need a local distributor or a local agent if you're an SME. It takes a phenomenal amount of time to build relationships with people in those particular countries. I've known people open up an office in Kuwait and they've probably spent the best part of 2 years meeting people, informally having coffee with them before they've even been able to just, you know, strike up meaningful business relationships. And SMEs can't afford that level of cost commitment and level of uncertainty. So I definitely think building up that initial relationship with suitable partner or partnering organisations is so important.
Okay, good. Justin, any thoughts on, from your perspective, whether it relates to Ireland or more international? You're on mute. Justin, you're on mute.
Sorry, apologies for that.
Okay.
No, it is fascinating our listener to Sean's comments. Yeah, my experience has been predominantly in the private sector. I have done work with some public sector clients here, large ones here in Northern Ireland on procurement. There's not a great deal of cross north-south procurement. When I think about it, there's very few companies that I deal with in the north would have contracts in the south or bring in OJU, etc. But I've noticed a lot of clients have all, since COVID, have all, I wouldn't use the word bailed into the public sector, but they've all been to protect their business and because you're guaranteed to get paid. A lot of them have moved towards the public sector here for the contracts, and it's quite strange for what's going on with COVID and what's going on with Brexit at the moment. A lot of sectors here are still very, very busy. Construction in Ireland is flying, and Dublin is, they're building houses. So it's really strange. In one level, we're still expecting the cliff because it's being supported by financial, a lot of it, to be honest. So it's interesting. My comments on just public sector procurement here in Northern Ireland, my own personal views on the 4 clients I've dealt with, it's incredibly bureaucratic to get in there. It's hassle. It's not made simple for the SMEs who historically don't have the resources or the skills to do it, to fill out the forms incorrectly. And they find it a chore, but when they're in the system, it's pretty good. Some of the models, I would say, were flawed. I think they promote a value for money, but when you award contracts 100% on price, you exclude a lot of good people, you exclude a lot of clients. So I think it's a flawed model. I've never bought anything in my life on price. In 15 years of Coca-Cola, Kingspan, you have to have quality and service. So, but, on the flip side, interestingly, the rules aren't as different to private sector. They've just got more strict rules, but we don't do pre-engagement when you do a proper procurement tender. We do follow the exact same rules in the private sector, maybe not as strict or as stringent, but we have professionalism and we have integrity around it as well. So in many ways, it's not as complicated. I think the biggest problem is the specification. The people who design, there's not enough linking. They don't firstly take total cost of ownership into it. But the people, in my experience, who design the specification and the tender at the end were never near the coalface to see what was actually needed. And that's because they were afraid of, they didn't know what they were specifying, and then they wouldn't meet suppliers because they'd be turned in nuts. So it's a tough one. I think there's a lot of improvement. There's a huge amount of waste in it, in my experience. So and my last point is it's extremely transactional here in Ireland. There's no strategic thinking. There's very few strategic procurement in my own experience, and again, it's limited. So I can't speak for public sector, but that'd be my sort of top line thoughts on it. I try to avoid it personally, but
yeah, okay. You mentioned earlier on about the north-south difference.
Yes.
Do you think that will start to align a little bit following Brexit?
Yes, I do. I think we're seeing significant changes in supply chain already in 2 or 3 weeks. We're seeing now hauliers avoiding the UK. Even there's like forklift companies, certain sectors, they're now supplying Ireland. Now Ireland's a very small market to most GB suppliers, but we are now getting a lot more, like hubs, supply chain hubs have changed, Steve, already to supply the Irish market from Europe because of the complications of getting stuff into GB and getting them across into Northern Ireland is less difficult, but into the Republic is a full export declaration. So we're already seeing significant changes. We've got 6 new direct boats to Europe. Now we're not seeing much on the containerization side coming through yet, but there's definitely changes. Northern Ireland in this, we're always hostile and we're always unique and we're always causing trouble, but we've got our feet in 2 camps and legally how it works going down the line.
Can I just pose a question there? Do you still find that there's a big differential between Belfast and Dublin in terms of cost, or is that equalised? Is that starting to equalise out?
No, Sean, it's Dublin is a different world to here at times. like the Irish investment arm called actually IDA, like the companies, the pharma companies in Ireland and the large companies in Ireland would dwarf what's in Northern Ireland. So they call one of the biggest problems in Dublin is just the price of housing.
Yeah.
So it's more dynamic, it's more international in the north. But we're going to have to align to that. You know, we're going to have to align more to Europe because how it pans out with, like even REACH, I was talking about REACH this morning on the chemical side. Where we sit in Northern Ireland with REACH, I have absolutely no idea. But we were hit this week because of a simple error in the final negotiations of Brexit. Steel tariffs, we weren't part of the quota. On Northern Ireland suppliers been hit by a 25% steel quota. Now, we're trying to undo that. But like Northern Ireland's biggest export is large manufacturing of Terax and Caterpillar and large equipment. So overnight we'd be destroyed. So to answer your question, no, Dublin is more dynamic, much higher cost base than Northern Ireland.
Yeah, I lived in Dublin in 2003, and for a while we had an office in Dublin and we had an office in Belfast.
Yeah.
And I typically fly into Dublin on a Monday or catch the ferry over so I got into Dublin earlier than the flights could. Spend a few hours in Dublin and then I'd get the train up to Belfast. And I'm just wondering, in terms of if someone was looking to enter the Irish market, would you say that Northern Ireland could be a cheaper option for them and travel down from the north? Very much so. It's something we've it's because the train from Dublin, it's about an hour and a half. Very much so, Sean. It's absolutely. It's going to become like Northern Ireland will offer people the best of both worlds, particularly the financial services. There's a lot of the big accountancy guys are based in Northern Ireland, like PwC, but all these offices here, you know, the Deloitte's are all here, but the flyer consultants all to England all during the week because it's a lower salary and a lower cost base. Yeah. So Northern Ireland, we've seen examples here of companies this week I'm dealing with are really seeing opportunities in Brexit. Now we have a lot of challenges. We have the extra cost. We have huge challenges. And we have a pretty negative mindset in terms of thinking about innovation and strategic thinking. But we have an opportunity. Like even this week, I'm starting to see a lot of more like near sourcing happening. A lot more companies are now starting to move supply chains. We're seeing the cost of containers out of China crippling us. Yeah, you know, absolutely, from $2,000 last March to $10,000-$12,000 now. So it's going to help Europe and bring it back. And supply chains, I'm excited because I'm a supply chain, that's my background, but I think we're going to see a huge shake-up in how supply chains are going forward.
We're going to be talking at length about supply chains.
Oh, sorry.
I just want to, just conscious of time.
Apologies.
Ian, are there any sort of thoughts you have about bringing it back to the sort of public sector debate? Any sort of comments that you want to make?
I can certainly support what Victor and Luke were talking about. But previous to this role, I used to run a manufacturer of bathroom products that exported to about 30 countries around the world. So, and you know, I can remember Victor was talking about the technical requirements was a real challenge there because we're selling quite often into healthcare, into hospitals, and whilst then there may be standards that are published, and what often isn't published is the unwritten rules. And that, together with the relationships issue, really meant that, you know, we generally had a policy of working through a local agent, as you're saying, because it's very hard to understand the local business culture, understand the local, build up those relationships, and understand the unwritten specifications and requirements without that local knowledge.
Okay, good. Right, I think given where we are on timing, Nancy, I'll bring you in on, I think, on the next question. Yeah. So the next question.
Sorry, just final remark on how public procurement can differ. You mentioned the framework contracts as a standard solution for the UK market. If you talk about framework contracts here in Poland, no suppliers would know what you mean, and framework contracts are virtually non-existent as a solution in public procurement. So differences can be very, very huge.
Yeah.
Actually, sorry, there was one brief question which you might not. But I was curious to know whether, in everyone's experience, is there any difference between supply of products and supply of services in this respect?
Yes, I think there's a big difference, and it's that supplier services, typically people can get on planes, or you can do supplier services outside of the country. So for example, you might have a small team in country, but you could be doing it from your own office, or what a lot of people have done, such as if you look at the big companies like Petrofac and other people who do oil and gas facilities, is that they'll outsource and they'll have a massive team of people based in Mumbai, and they'll service projects all around the world from Mumbai because of the lower cost base. So I think services are a lot easier than goods, in my opinion. And I've been involved in probably the biggest sort of stuff I've been supplied in terms of goods and procurement of goods is being the oil and gas sector and large power and process. And it's a totally different ballgame trying to procure by ship. And I think for an SME, they need to also understand the logistics and how people are going to frame their logistics. As a, you know, if you're going into a market. So for example, if you were going to go into Azerbaijan as an SME, one of your biggest issues is corruption and customs, and you'll be expected to pay bribes to get your stuff out of your things out of customs. Now, all of the big international companies that operate there have logistics companies that take care of that for them. And one of the reasons for that is they're keeping themselves clean, that they're not tainted with unnecessary corruption. But they all know that they need to they're all going to suffer that. And that's people as big as BP and people. But then as an SME has to understand that they're going to have a number of tiers that they might have to ship the goods through. Well, you won't get that with services, you know.
Okay. Good. All right. I'm going to move on to the next question now. And I'll probably start with you, Ian, on this one. So the question is around procurement and sustainability. How important is sustainability in the procurement process, and what should businesses do to take advantage of these this importance in order to secure contracts? So Ian, do you want to kick off?
So I think it's very variable. It's worse, and it really depends very much on who you're selling to and what their priorities are. So certainly in the UK, with public sector becoming increasingly important, and a lot of large multinational brands, most of them have made zero carbon commitments. And the important thing to realize about zero carbon is that for most businesses, 80% of their carbon footprint is in their supply chain or their value chain. So these zero carbon commitments can't be done simply by them saving energy. They will ultimately they'll have to drive it into their supply chain. So I think this is going to become of increasing importance. But it's very lumpy and it's very variable. There are certainly some countries around the world that are just not really heavily engaged in sustainability, and there are others where it's vitally important. So again, it's you know, it comes down to understanding the local knowledge, understanding your customers.
Okay. I'll turn to Nancy to get your view on your perspective on the subject of sustainability in the sort of international trading environment that you operate in.
Well, obviously, the sustainable procurement is a very big subject or topic. For the way I see it, there's a lots of big benefits of sustainable procurement. And one of the biggest one is obviously a more efficient and effective use of natural resources. we all know that natural resources are limited, but how we utilize it and how we optimize it is really important for business and for the entire world. And in terms of how business can do to get the benefit of or promote that ethos is encourage innovation. It will create very strong signals to the sustainable products market, for instance. So but it requires a lot of efforts and the whole entire global effort, not just one country or one region. So it's definitely one of the major topics, and it's just become more and more important, and in fact it's more and more urgent, because a lot of governments and call for these things. So
Okay.
that's my view.
Good. All right, thank you. Luke, what are your thoughts on this subject?
I personally think it's mission critical. I mean, we've only got the one planet, and sustainability has got to be what it's all about, and we can't afford to waste and, all of those sorts of things. But I do find that there's a big difference between sort of first world and third world thinking around, that sustainability of procurement, because if you are sitting in a country that maybe doesn't have, I think there is definitely a thought that maybe sustainable procurement might be a little bit more expensive. And I think there's a lot of education that's needed around that to make sure that people understand that it's not necessarily that much more expensive, and why it's important to do that. And I don't think a lot has been done in a lot of these sort of emerging markets to do that type of education. But it is quite difficult to explain to a procurement office in a third world country that maybe you need to spend a little bit more because it's going to save you a lot more in the long term, when a short-term need is just so much more important than whatever the long-term view might be.
Yeah. Okay. I think it's been a little bit drowned out as well in 2020 because of obviously the pandemic, but I'm sure it's going to come back again in 2021, and we've got the COP26 conference happening in November. Nicole, what are your thoughts on sustainability?
I think, in the past years, that's been something that's been at the forefront, like you've just mentioned. I do think over the last year, some decisions have been made with that state of emergency in mind. So not necessarily all the decisions made have been made with the sustainability in mind. Right, we'll make that decision because it might save our business in a way, or it might. So people that have, board level, that have sat at the table have not necessarily taken that into consideration. So they may have taken decisions to, go down a route which isn't necessarily the one in a normal situation, or if 2020 was the way it should have been, they probably wouldn't have taken those decisions. So there has been, I think, in the last year, a slight shift, and it has taken a back step. But looking forward, hopefully, like you say, it will come back into the forefront, and decisions will be more taken a little bit more considerably as well. But cost is a massive thing. We've found that loyalty hasn't necessarily always been there, and there has been a shift in doing business, and what would have been a loyal client, and I've heard that from everybody, for 12 years, 20 years, has suddenly decided to go elsewhere to cut costs. And it may have been that client, for 20 years you would have had those discussions about sustainability and all that kind of stuff. So hopefully we can pull it back in and kind of slow down, look at, you know, the crisis that's happened, that is happening, and take just more sensitive and sensible decisions, I think.
Are you finding your own clients are sort of asking for more provisions around sustainability now than they used to?
It is, yeah, part of some discussions. So, you know, and we work with the aviation industry. We, you know, keep our ear to the ground and really working, you know, together, like automotive, like other, you know, industries, where, you know, you look at the long term and things that we can, you know, kind of gnaw at and reflect that with our clients. Yeah.
Okay. Let me turn to Victor. What are your thoughts on the sustainability, Victor?
Let me discuss this question from the corporate governance point of view, especially the procurement one. So generally speaking, procurement works as an intermediary between the organization and the external suppliers, the supply base of the organization. So it seems that it's ideally positioned to both drive the sustainable agenda, but also make it attainable and viable for the organization and other stakeholders. So the underlying challenge is that whatever the CSR department or sustainability department within the corporation come up with, then the procurement has to transform that into real procurement decisions. And in different markets, many suppliers can be not mature enough. Even reporting of CO2 emissions may be a problem, not to mention meeting some certain standards. So ultimately, procurement might be afraid of the simple fact that while meeting this internal criteria, they won't get their job done. They won't be able to supply their organization and meet their own objectives. So as many of you mentioned, a lot of time is required, and we should take it with a pinch of salt, the tempo which we can actually achieve in terms of sustainability. However, I see the promising trend that many ultimate clients, many consumers will look into companies and will simply demand the clarity around sustainability in a very broad terms, including, you know, modern slavery and support of local farmers, etc. I highly recommend that you will watch a movie. It's a very simple, short movie done by Accenture. It's Red String, very simple title. Red String shows how blockchain will help to understand how the whole supply chain works and how sustainable it is. So I hope that in the future there will be more and more technological solutions that will help us sort that out.
Okay. And are clients in the Central Eastern Europe increasingly putting sustainability, social impact and all those sort of provisions in their contracts?
Yeah, we see that more and more RFQs coming, RFIs coming in terms of ESG, and we think that this trend will be continued. And there is definitely an increasing attention paid to that.
Okay.
Steve, can I just add something very quickly? I mentioned about sustainable products earlier. I know one company, I mean, obviously there's a challenge. They're trying to bring a, let's say, a biodegradable food packaging into the market. But it's a great idea, and it's definitely a sustainable product. However, in order to turn this into a final product, they will have to purchase the raw material, which is a plant-based film from either Finland or the UK, and then ship over to the Far East to be made into the final products, and then ship back to the UK. So you just have to weigh out. I mean, I think this is the challenge. You know, you just have to weigh out whether eventually this is all, you know, worth pursuing, really.
Steve, I just a few points from my side.
Yeah.
Whatever he's saying there is correct. It's something I've always been very passionate about, albeit I work for Coca-Cola. But interestingly, it's the only company ever had CSR in our actual objectives. Now, there's obviously PR benefits, but they're the only company that has ever really pursued sustainability. And the other, look, cost still rules in most clients. Unfortunately, even when we do tenders and we do weightings, sustainability will get a low rating. If it gets 5%, 10%, you're doing quite well. And if it's, but my two big observations on it is we don't, from a procurement point of view, and it's interesting, it's linked to point 1 about public sector and point 5 about data, but the total cost of ownership is never fully understood. When we take a total cost approach, sustainable products that may be more expensive up front are actually better. And this goes back to public sector procurement, whose rules are wrong around because they don't allow that. And also sometimes data. Some great data now is fantastic, but data, particularly when it's in the hands of, dare I say, accountants, is very, very money focused. We just go for bottom line profit. So anywhere where I take a total life cost approach, like I done one in an example very quickly in Coke, forklifts. Our forklifts with a supplier A were going to be cost us £300,000 more by going for these forklifts over a 7-year period. When I took total cost, we turned out £800. I took it. So we need business to think more about total cost of ownership, and we need them to be built into public sector thinking. It's too short-termism. I'll make 2 quick points about COVID. I think COVID from an environmental point of Owen's thing has a great potential because we learned that supply chains have become too simple. I spent 20 years making them simple, buy small things. We're going to have to start ordering things in proper quantities. So we'll see less movements, I believe, certainly in GB, maybe not around the rest of the world. But so you'll see more sustainable delivery of products, higher volumes of products, less packaging. So I'm optimistic that could have environmental benefits. But COVID has been a wake-up call, and we've been running the supply chains too lean and too many white vans running around with single parcels. That may be yeah, that's my tuppence on it.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Justin. And Sean?
Yeah, just share a few comments. I think Ian's perfectly right that organisations need to be sustainable, but they need to recognise as well who they're selling to. And you're not going to be able to charge a premium. You might have to be sustainable, but you're not necessarily going to be able to charge a premium for being sustainable. So you need to understand your pricing matrix and what the local markets can take. So if you take Asia as an example, it's an extremely wide continent. If you look at, say, Hong Kong and Singapore, 2 very advanced economies, they're because of the pressures on the people, the populations that live in both of those places, you're going to find that they place a high value on sustainable products, low pollution, etc. Go to the Philippines and Thailand, you're going to find the complete reverse. Same as if you went to India. You really have to understand that, one, your organization needs to be sustainable for its future development, but 2, the markets you're going to might not recognize it as a premium, and if you're going in there, you might not be able to compete if you're more expensive. It might mean that you choose to go to that marketplace. You might choose somewhere that's going to pay you a little bit extra and cover your costs for being able to be fully sustainable, or as sustainable as you believe you want to be. Because most companies will have a base. So, for example, if you're based in Europe, your sustainable goals and your KPIs for Europe are going to be different than they will be in Asia. So you might find that, unless you're selling as a premium brand into one of those countries, you're just never going to get your money back. And you need to understand that. That's not to say that there aren't initiatives. If you look at a lot of the World Bank and multilateral development banks, they're placing extremely high relevance in tenders, and they expect the people seeking loans from them to deal with sustainability, to deal with local population training, knowledge transfer. So there is money there, but you have to understand how it's going to relate to what you're doing.
Yeah. Okay. Good point, Sean. Right. I'm just, because we're due to finish at 1:30. What I'm going to do is combine two questions because they are kind of one. They are part of one another. So, and I'll ask the question in two parts as a result. So, how will the pandemic and other developments affect supply chains of the future, and how should businesses prepare for these changes? And PPE is part of that as well. There's been a lot of noise about PPE in 2020 and about how that was procured. So as a follow-on to that sort of general, what are the future supply chains look like? How do you think businesses managed the procurement of PPE in 2020? And what are the lessons for the future? So basically collapse two questions into one there. And I'd like to start with Luke. Luke, are you there?
I think he's frozen. He appears to be frozen.
I thought he was thinking about the question. Let's go to Justin.
It's no, I'm back. Okay. No, valid. Supply chain resilience. I think the first thing, like again, I gave a webinar this morning about just understanding supply chains and mapping them out. We need to understand what they're like and what the detail is. And most companies I'm in, worryingly, particularly SMEs, do not understand their supply chains. They really do not understand, particularly under Brexit. Country of origin is going to be a massive thing for us within Europe, but certainly if you're exporting to the States, anybody's experience of exporting to the States, there's no messing about with country of origin. They take it very, very seriously. So that COVID was a big wake-up call for supply chains at the vulnerabilities. So I do believe we're starting to see it, as I mentioned earlier on, if I'm repeating myself, we're starting to see already near sourcing stopping. We're starting to see changes. I think we'll start to see supply chains becoming a lot more local. I worry if SMEs have the resources and the money, and they need to be a lot more proactive around their supply chains. But encouragingly, supply chains and most companies, like I talk about profitability, most companies don't have a profitability mindset. And when so the advantage is, yes, we're going to incur additional costs, but with supply chain resilience, there's a serious amount of savings in operations and in supply chains and in procurement that are on top, because it's dirty, it takes a bit of work. So there are significant savings in there which will offset a lot of the costs and will make companies more resilient, better, and less risk. So we need to remove the risk out of supply chains, and we need to do that very, very quickly, both for sustainability and for all of the reasons.
Yeah.
So I think it's a fascinating year. The PPE, just typical, like I'm fond in the media, but it was a mess all around. Interestingly, on the 7th of February, I'm a pharmaceutical company, and I spotted it was going on from December, but I went and moved on the 7th of December and ordered 6 months worth of gloves when we knew what was happening and we knew there's no shelf life. So they didn't move quick enough. They weren't reactive. They didn't do consolidate. They probably talked about it for ages. On the time they decided to move in Ireland as well, very much in Ireland and GB, it was happening in America, and the whole supply chain become more, so that they weren't agile enough. They hadn't got a specification right. They didn't benchmark. It was a classic example of everything that you do in procurement, they done it wrong. And then it was all hell for leather. And now they're sitting now with 4,000 containers sitting in Felixstowe. That's messing up our supply chains. So I was very disappointed. It brought procurement supply chain in a particularly bad light, but there was certainly a lot of skill lacking in the procurement process, which unfortunately doesn't surprise me.
Okay.
Sorry if that sounds a bit scathing, but
sorry, I lost you there, Steve.
Yeah,
when you asked the question.
I did ask you the question first, Luke, and then you froze. So
my apologies.
Did you hear the question?
Yes, I did. As I was starting to talk, my machine decided it was bored of my voice and cut me and said, cheers, thank you very much. I think in terms of, I want to go back to what Victor was talking again about earlier about digitization in procurement. And I think if you look at what happened over COVID and the response, the emergency response that was needed would have been significantly stronger if digital procurement was more in place, more entrenched. And I think the opportunity that we need to take from COVID is to be more digitally orientated in the procurement we're doing, because you can be a lot more transparent, but you can more importantly be a lot more reactive in a very short period of time. And I think that's where we need to get to. And I was so interested when Victor was talking about, some of those countries that have got, the countries you mentioned like Norway and Finland, and they're always the countries that pop up as being well run, highly efficient. And it's interesting that you've got this this correlation between digitization and efficiency. And it's my personal mission is to try and bring that kind of level of openness and transparency and digitization to other areas and other sectors where I think can be massively beneficial. And I know it's a pipe dream to a large degree, because there's a good reason why a lot of people don't follow digital procurement processes and things like that. It is because it is so transparent and can be, maybe less manipulated or more difficult to manipulate. So it would be difficult to kind of entrench those things. But, if you take what Victor was saying in the beginning and you apply it to what Ian was saying also just around, sustainability and all those kinds of things, digital networking creates all of these easy touch points and all these, these extra decisions that can enter into the decision-making process a lot quicker. Nicole was talking about how do you make sure that, the decisions that are made today, how they're going to affect tomorrow, and why we're making a certain decision today that might be different from the way we'd make it tomorrow because we're dealing with the whole COVID environment. But yet digitization does have that ability just to bring a very clear sort of standard to the whole process and allow us to be a lot more reflective and a lot more efficient. And I'm certainly hopeful that COVID has taught us that we need to be implementing those types of solutions.
Okay. And what about PPE? Any thoughts about how that was done?
Well, again, I can only speak to my South African experience, and we knew what was going to happen. The president stood there, and he's a wonderful man, and he tries his damnedest in a very difficult environment, and he has been our champion. I mean, he really has taken the world on his shoulders, and he's tried to carry South Africa on his shoulders, and we're extremely proud of the efforts that he's put in. But, when he mentioned that there are these funds and things that were going to be created around PPE, you just knew it was going to be a recipe for disaster. You just knew that there was going to be lots of corruption. There was going to be lots of monies that were going to be, taken out of the system. And you had a lot of private businesses that were backing government to try and help them do the things that they needed to achieve. And it was very much done on the back of, I promise there will be no corruption this time around. And yeah, I mean, I was fascinated when I started reading about the corruption and stuff that happened in the States and the UK. I mean, we obviously are all the same. My African sentiment is obviously the same as everybody else's, and sometimes we think we're a bit different, but then every now and then we get a reminder that that we really are all the same. And then it's a travesty, because if you look at PPE corruption, you're taking away access to life-saving, critical care type materials. And then you've got a situation in South Africa where now we're saying, oops, there's no money for vaccine. We haven't got, we missed our first payment of purchasing vaccine, and very much the Western world is blamed because it's only the countries with access to funding that can afford the vaccines and things like that. But if you just look at our own waste through the procurement process, you say, but the money was there. It was just not properly utilized. And that's incredibly sad. And people lose their lives from these sorts of things. And, it's not like you just, taking 10% out of the bricks that you were going to use to build a school that hopefully you get away with. This is really meaningful, taking things away from people at the most desperate time of need. And it's extremely unfortunate.
Okay. Thank you. Now, I noticed Sandra's joined us. Welcome, Sandra. Justin was talking when he talked about his bit, and I think you heard it, about the States. So I think it'd be quite good to get your perspective. I don't know whether you heard the question, but it was to do with what the pandemic and other developments, what effect they will have on supply chains of the future, and how should businesses prepare for those changes. And I decided to also wrap in the PPE question in there as well.
Right.
Right.
Well, thank you, Steve. I'm so sorry to join late. I was hosting a placemaking session earlier, but just what Justin and what Luke have just said is, you know, we've got to learn from it, right? There's just no question about it. I live in Washington, D.C., so some of you have heard me say that I'm now in an armed encampment. We have 25,000 troops here in the United States protecting the inauguration of President Biden tomorrow. We've got to learn from these things, don't we? But my comment about procurement, however, is that it's broken everywhere. As I've traveled around the world with different cities, and I work with cities for a living. So I guess what Luke was saying about making procurement digital to be more efficient and therefore creating new standards. I mean, I work with cities where their procurement document is 30 pages long. And then Dubai, I think Dubai's document is 6 pages long, and it happens that quickly. In Boston, a procurement can take 18 months to 2 years. In Dubai, I think it takes 6 weeks. And I'm not sure, I apologize for my ignorance about how it works in the UK right now, but there is no reason for us not to think outside the box here. You know, let's break away from tradition and let's break away from institutions that were created in the 1930s that are not serving our needs today. Well, I don't want to get on a soapbox, Steve, but anyway,
Yeah.
I'm already on it. So I guess my point to all of us on this call and anybody listening is let's look at new ways of procuring technology, services, goods. You know, it's happening around the world where it's much more efficient. And I think what your question about the pandemic and learning from it is really on point, because I frankly, my personal opinion, sadly, is that 2021 will not be much different from 2020, especially in terms of restrictions to trade and travel and businesses. But my passion right now is to help small and medium-sized enterprises around the world. If small and medium enterprises fail in cities, cities will fail. And I'm not standing for that. So I guess I'm too long-winded. I apologize, but I think you're really raising the right questions. We've got to figure out new ways of procuring goods and services.
Good. Let me ask Sean, what's your thoughts on the subject of how
Supply chains of the future are going to have to go back to the old ways that supply chains operated,
Yeah.
when they were extremely legally and commercially focused. And I say that because cash is king for an SME, and they can't afford to be caught in the position where either they can't pay someone or they have to pay someone and someone's not paying them. So they need to look at their contracts upstream and downstream. What's come to the real fore at the moment is which choice of governing law you have. So, for example, in China, they were issuing force majeure certificates to relieve people from the issues that are arising. Now, if you had governing Chinese law as your governing law, could have found that your supply chain were off the hook. If you had UK law and there wasn't a provision in the contract, they wouldn't have been. So people are really focusing on governing law, dispute resolution methods. So, for example, I know a lot of people who've been able to resolve disputes with online mediation, also online arbitration, and that was possible because the contract made provision for that. And I don't think people would have thought about those things previously, or if they did think of them, they wouldn't have thought about being able to do them online. And then also termination and relief in the contracts are extremely important. So I think supply chains are going to change. SMEs are particularly vulnerable just because of the size of the organizations, and they need to get this right. They need to think about what's going on upstream and downstream. And then just coming to the issue of PPE, I'm sure as most people, we wondered what was going on in our respective countries when governments were spending millions or billions, sometimes awarding them these contracts to companies that had a balance sheet with probably less than my bank account. So I think we've all been shocked. One thing that surprised me was that the organisation or the governments were willing to move quickly to procure things. and it's unusual. And you can see now why that they don't usually procure that quickly when you've got ridiculous size contracts being awarded to. Some of them weren't even SMEs; they were sole traders, or just an individual guy who decided he was going to start supplying. I'm not sure overseas about the issues of PPE, but I know what I've seen in the UK, and it's absolutely frightening. Now, I mentioned before, and I apologise to any of the people who were listening from overseas, that there was a program Only Fools and Horses, and you had the fly-by-night guys who, if you needed a decorator, they were a decorating company. If you needed wine, and for the church, they became a wholesaler of wine. And I think that's the danger with SMEs, that they can get lured into thinking that they can do what they want when they want. And that's not necessarily going to build a solid business for them. So just be aware of that. If they get away with it, good. I know somebody's made 30 million from being able to turn spirits in the alcohol business into a hand sanitizer. And they've done well, but just be careful. Just get it right, get your paperwork right, and then everything else should flow from that.
Okay, thank you, Sean. Nicole, any thoughts on how the pandemic and whatever else is going on are affecting supply chains and how they will change in the future?
I can only agree, with everybody else. Really, my notes that I put previously were, more digital processes involved. Companies are going to be looking to cut costs, but also they need to, in the labor side of things, but they just need to have a look at, invested on more automated systems, but some that they're quite innovative, where it's not just like 30 years ago, 40 years ago, where, it's just the tick box. I have something that's more intelligent, that really talks to one another and to the public and to everybody. So an all-rounder, the supply chain resilience, a big one. The other developments, will be for Brexit, import, export, all that kind of thing, with lots and lots of changes happening in the UK. And I think as a supplier, it's having a look at, in terms of resilience, plan A, plan B, plan C, because you can plan for plan A and put that forward to, a new business or, public sector. And actually we've learned, and especially like in the aviation industry, one day, you're applying for landing permits in Russia, and then the next day that you're not allowed to enter the country at all, whoever you speak, even if it's with your agent that's over there. So I think it's really to plan A, plan B, plan C, and for the SMEs to do some of that homework as well, to really put it into perspective. And for the PP procurement, there was this sense of, again, of panic that was set in. Therefore, people took advantage of it. Kind of, there were no rules, regulations. Nothing was made really official. So to the urgency put on it. So, it was a free for all. And I think, people did take advantage of that. And, we saw PPE being made in, horrendous places, videos that got leaked online and whatnot. So, and that was going back to what I was saying, in a state of emergency, kind of panic sets in. And the same for, now moving the vaccines. We're seeing it with moving cargo. You've got private tenants that have their private aircraft that are saying, yep, we can move the vaccines, but actually what they're not looking at is providing really something that's regulated with, it has to be at a certain temperature, it has to be, all of those things, because again, there's that sense of panic where we need as many vaccines as possible. So therefore, anybody will kind of take a crate delivered, in the middle of nowhere just to, have that. But the consequences are, loss of lives, etc., etc. So yeah, it is different times.
Thank you. Nancy, What are your thoughts on this subject?
Yeah, although no one is prepared for a situation like this world pandemic, can I just say something may sound like a cliche. It's always better to be proactive than reactive. So it's in my own experience in terms of procurement. One of the strategies is always to have, like Nicole says, plan B, in other words, secondary supply. So, you have, once you have a contingency plan in place, you will be in a much stronger position to deal with these unexpected or extraordinary situation. So maybe even the plan C. So that's the one thing I would regardless pandemic or whatever situation is, always. I know a lot of companies beginning to source to seek the alternative supplies, but I think regardless, you always, it's good to have, a couple of options, particularly on those products which are the key range, which will bring you most revenue. So you can't afford, being in a position where you can't get your products anymore. So yeah, that's my view. In terms of PPE, funny enough, in the beginning of the pandemic, in fact, when China outbreak started, we were heavily involved in sourcing PPE because there's a lot of companies in China and came to us and asked for help. But it was incredible. I think the time is really crucial. A few minutes will will make a huge difference. So for instance, I was talking to a supplier, the UK supply, say they have got this in stock, but another 10 minutes later, that stock, it could be already sold. So it's incredible. But as the situation develops even worse, then we realize that we won't be able to in the position we won't be able to help anymore. So we just decided to move on to other projects rather than focus on the PPE, which simply we didn't have any outcome. So
okay, thank you. Ian, any thoughts on this subject?
Yeah, I watched a fascinating TED talk by a lady called Margaret Heffernan last week, which was recorded in 2019 and now seemed incredibly prophetic. And she was talking about the fact that really for the last 50 years or so, we've just focused increasingly on nothing but efficiency. And she makes a point that efficiency works really well when you can predict what you're going to need. But increasingly the unexpected is becoming the norm. And when unexpected becomes more normal, as we've discovered in the last year, efficiency isn't just not very helpful, it's actively unhelpful because it prevents you from being able to react. And so, she makes a point, and this is what Nancy was saying, is that you can't plan for every eventuality, but you can be prepared for the fact that the unexpected is going to come. And so supply chain resilience is going to become increasingly important, and it's directly related to sustainability, as Justin really made some really super valid points. To be more resilient, you're going to need more localization of supply. You're going to need to build in resilience to your supply chain. So we'll see, big shipments and stock holding which actually will be much better, from a sustainability point of view. And I also agree with Luke that, digitization is going to be critical to improve resilience, but also to improve sustainability. And I think the important thing from a sustainability point of view there is about transparency. And transparency of supply chains is going to become so important. There's a really interesting example, small example, but interesting to see. If you go on Marks and Spencer's website, you actually see they've got an interactive map of the world, and you can drill into that and discover every single supplier that they use and every single material, and even and discover facts around the gender balance in the factories and so on. And that level of transparency, I think, is where we need to get to sort out a lot of the issues we've been talking about today.
Okay, thank you. Victor, I know we haven't asked you on this particular question, and I'm conscious of time, and I think you wanted to speak about the final question, right, which is around the use of technology, which we've actually touched on already. So if I can ask you first of all, and then others can step in with their views, what do you think the developments are in procurement to adopt more digital tools? What sort of tools are they? What sort of platforms? And what should businesses do to prepare for these changes and adopt the new technologies?
Yeah, I will try to answer that question from very procurement-focused point of view. First, more about the markets, and then about the intra-procurement challenges that we as procurement people, procurement professionals are facing. So you might have heard about Ariba, which is the biggest IT tool for procurement solution, and they claim they have over 5 million suppliers on their network. They call it Ariba network. So the similar numbers goes for Copa, Evalua, and likes, the biggest procurement tools for procurement professionals. When you look at some estimations, you may come up with a number of over 160 million companies in the world. So on average, according to the United Nations and some other sources, we've got one company per 60 people on our planet. So at first glance, it seems that there is still a nice way to go for Ariba and their competitors, because there are still many more companies to join the network. However, I personally expect something different to happen, because what SMEs need and many other companies in various sectors need is a kind of deformalization of the tools. Ariba is a very complicated tool. It takes a lot of time. It's actually a huge investment to enter this. So when we have a look at construction sector, I love this sector because it's a very interesting blend of very different market sectors, market types, monopolies, almost perfect competition, also various tiers of society, top-notch engineers in one place with many immigrant workers who don't speak the local language. So it's construction sector is a very, very interesting one. And construction companies used to rely predominantly on phone calls to get deals done. So it was really, really informal. Although they have spent a lot of money and they have revenues, relatively high revenues, they use telephones, very, very informal. So actually, if you want to get some pricing for a typical construction supplier, the best way to do is just go to the house of the supplier, knock his door, kindly ask to, with all documents printed off, give me please some pricing, and then come back, answer the questions, be very, very encouraging. And in such a situation, it's almost unimaginable to convince them to enter Ariba network, to fill in all complicated RFQs, log on every day, etc., etc. Of course, there is space for some improvement, but what I expect is a kind of trend that small companies will try to replicate the ways how the consumers behave. So we've got Amazon, in Poland, we have similar platform which is called Allegro or OLX, and these SMEs deal on this more consumer-oriented platforms. And I expect the same will happen to many procurement tools. They need to be simple. They need to replicate how the business is done on the basis between the B2C basis. So that's probably unexpected, well, not so obvious trend. And as you remember, phone calls was the best way to deal with construction companies. And now it might be just Facebook chat, some informal ways. They may take the hold. Well, and I mentioned also that there are big challenges within the procurement teams in terms of IT adoption. We took part in a very interesting study that revealed that the biggest obstacle for increasing digitalization of procurement processes are people. And then it turned out, when we digged a little bit more, that it's not what comes to mind first. So it's not being afraid of being made redundant, because there is now a tool that replaces us. In procurement, there is still a lot of space to become more active than reactive, to go into, as you perfectly know, to go into strategic functions. So that's not the case here. The real problem is that there is still this mental challenge with a change, and also paradoxically abundance of tools. So there are too many big corporations, there are too many tools to deal with the procurement process. So almost everyone gets confused, and then it's better to give a call. So a kind of trend or a push to increase awareness is probably the key to improve digitalization of the procurement processes.
Okay, thank you. Very comprehensive reply. I know, Luke, when you talked about the supply chains question, you also referred to the digitization of procurement. So what are your thoughts on this subject?
Well, yeah, I think Victor's 100% correct in the things that he's talking about there, but I also think we need to look at the opportunity that COVID has created once again. Sean was talking about the fact that we were, in most instances, governments all around the world were able to procure quite quickly when they needed to. That's an interesting thing, because often when you've been dealing with public sector, as Sean mentioned, it takes a hell of a long time. Suddenly it became very quick. And I think it was probably the first time that I could think of, maybe since the Second World War, where procurement actually became massively important to a country as a whole. It's not normally something that's front and center of day-to-day conversations about how a country procures things, but suddenly it was very much the forefront of those conversations, was talking about how do we do these things. And I think there's a massive opportunity for us not only to change things, that COVID has created this opportunity for us to digitize and change things, but there's such a need that's been created for procurement to be done a little bit differently, that there's an opportunity for us to go and approach a lot of the procurement entities in governments like South Africa and have a meaningful conversation about changing the procurement so that they can react to the next emergency, which no doubt there will be another emergency at some point in time.
Look,
and I think that's where we really...
I think procurement blew their opportunity because of PPE.
Well, yes and no.
I've had more people who are excited about procurement, and all I got was, oh, there's all procurement. There's procurement. That's what you do.
Yeah, I think simplistically, you might be right there, Justin, but I think, just the speed to markets and things that were created, and the fact that it was topical, and the fact also that it didn't work the way that it should have, I think is something that people are thinking about. And it does give us an opportunity to have a conversation on a far broader basis than what we've had before about why procurement is important and how sustainability and all those kinds of things can tie back into it. I think it's topical, and I think it's something that we need to keep on the agenda.
Just one couple of 2 points I would make on the question. I think it's a fascinating question. Like, my background's Cook with SAP, and SAP gave us instant answers. SAP, very data intensive, very labor intensive. What I noticed in my clients is a real split between my clients that have good data, good systems, are reacting much quicker than the ones with the blue screens. COVID means we couldn't react quickly, and also Brexit now, getting information out, commodity codes, speed. So the clients that I've noticed anecdotally that are better prepared with better systems are much better positioned. They have kicked on better in the last year. They haven't been that haven't been as constrained, because even people on furlough, it's easy to get stuff out. So that, to me, data, it's fundamental that it's essential going forward. I think the big data as well, to touch on the points people are mentioning, procurement's biggest challenge this year is forecasting. If you've got bad data on bad stuff, we can't buy well, and cash flow is going to be the massive problem. We've kicked it down the line now for a year. It's coming, this cash flow question, in my view. So to Victor's point too, when you've good systems, good data, I don't know if procurement should operate in isolation in their own systems. I think it has to be a company system where we feed into stocks and we feed into sales and we feed into finance and cash flow. But it has to be a system. I see too many companies that have too many systems that don't talk to each other, don't link up, and are just highly inefficient. So yeah, it's exciting for them, but that's mine. Even how accountants, basically the data is bad, but when we get Victor systems and people with good solutions and systems, we'll make better decisions because we'll have better data.
It will also be something just to bear in mind as well that, as like you're saying, the downturn, but there will be more mergers, there will be more acquisitions, there will be more, companies buying one another. I was working with a company only this week that, used to be Thomas Cook. Now they've been bought out by somebody else, so that I think will be just an added complexity with that digitalization of the procurement. So another thing.
Good. Okay. I'm just I've managed time quite poorly on this particular question, and I know Ian, Sean, and Nancy haven't had a go at answering it. I don't know. Do any of you want to say anything about digitization of procurement?
I expected that might happen, and I kind of rolled it into my previous answer. So.
Okay, that's fine.
Yeah, I'll keep quiet now. I think we should try to get the panel finished. I imagine people want to get off for the evening.
Yeah.
Good. Excellent. All right. Well, it's been that brings the panel discussion to a close. So I thank you very much, panelists, for your time and expertise today. It's been a really good conversation. I also, and we had Sandra very, very fleetingly. I think she was in between other meetings, but we had her for one of the questions, so that was good. And I also thank the observers for attending, and hopefully you have all gone away with some things to think about.